Order. Good afternoon and welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. This session is the second of the committee's inquiry into female entrepreneurship, and it will be a fantastic opportunity to explore the experiences of entrepreneurship with our 4 female founders that are part of our panel today, and we're very grateful to have you all. Thank you very much. The aim of the session is to understand the experiences of female founders in starting, growing and sustaining their businesses, including raising capital and accessing support. So welcome to you all. Just as a start of introduction, could you all introduce yourselves and describe the businesses that you have created? I'll start with you, Dr. Roni Savage.
Very much. I'm Roni Savage and I'm CEO and founder of Jomas Associates. We're an engineering and environmental consultancy serving the construction industry. I started off the business in December 2009, so just over 15 years ago. I haven't worked for over a decade in industry.
Excellent, thank you.
Brilliant. Hello everyone. I'm Izzy Obeng. I'm the founder of Foundervine. And Foundervine is a business that is focused on helping small businesses grow. So we work across the UK, running programs and initiatives that help entrepreneurs at all stages of their growth get access to the training, the networks and the support that they need to build sustainable businesses.
Fantastic, thank you.
Hello everybody, my name's Louise Hill. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called GoHenry. A money app helping children learn to earn, save, spend and invest. Founded 13 years ago, and if I fast forward to today, we've helped 2.2 million kids in the UK to be smarter with money, and hopefully a few outside of GoHenry as well.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Devie Mohan. I am the co-founder and CEO of Burnmark. We launched in 2016 and we are a fintech research company that provides research into financial institutions, challenger banks, private equity houses and investment houses. So we work closely with all players of the ecosystem.
Fantastic. We have got a real diversity of businesses and experiences, I think, here. Fantastic. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine first.
Thank you. It's great to meet you all. You've got fantastic CVs. So can I start with Devie, please? What has been your experience of accessing or trying to access investment for your business?
In one sentence, not great. If I were to explain the process of what we have tried with Burnmark, we start off with accelerator programs, typically in the fintech world. And this may or may not come from an incubator ecosystem, which I haven't been part of. We have been through a few accelerator programs run by large names and corporates. I can speak in more detail about the experience, but to give you an overall idea, we then tried to obtain more seed funding and angel funding as the next step, which is available in London as a fantastic fintech hub in terms of opportunities. And we have also tried then to lead on to the venture capital system. In terms of the experience itself, it is vastly easier in the early stages of fundraising. It depends on the location very much, I find, but London is great for fintech. And we have a huge number of accelerator programs available. However, the challenges we have faced going through the early stage accelerators and the seed funding initiatives we have is that we end up being diversity metrics sometimes, rather than being seriously seen as startups who deserve funding, looking at neutral metrics. So I have seen several programs that are extremely happy to have us, due to the nature of the business, of course, being in fintech and, of course, as a female founder. But unfortunately, the results have not been great in terms of obtaining funding through any of these programs for us.
Okay. And does anyone else want to add to any of that? Go, Louise.
I would love to add to that. So I think I would second some of what Devie has said there. We have been successful. We've raised over $125 million of funding prior to merging with an American fintech 2 years ago. But where we found reasonable access to pre-seed and seed funding, and then crowdfunding, which was very successful for us. We really started to run into problems at what I will call a late stage Series A, which was a $40 million round. We were looking for $40 million of investment. We pitched to over 103 UK, not over 103, I was going to say over 100. 103, I remember the number distinctly, UK and European based funds, and didn't find one fund prepared to lead. And that was despite, in my opinion, compelling financials and evidence of traction. What we did was go to the US, and 4 months later we had our lead, and were able to get followers in the UK, and one French, interestingly, female-founded fund, a lot of F's in that sentence, who joined as the second follower in that round.
Excuse me for interrupting. What do you think was the difference in the US? Why did they get it and the UK didn't get it?
I think both from GoHenry's experience and a lot of late-stage founders that I now know in my network, the appetite for risk, the opportunity that people see is very different in the US, and I think that's something has been cited and recorded in a lot of places. But there is no doubt that being female-led played into that as well.
Okay. And Izzy and Dr. Roni, you might like to answer, either of you could answer this one perhaps for me, which is, to what extent is a lack of diversity in investors and investment panels a barrier to female entrepreneurs getting more investment? And why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, so the research shows over and over again that men will invest more in men and women invest more in women. And that's saying it very simply, and there's lots of factors at play. I don't think that gender alone is what correlates there. I think there is a challenge that we tend to see in the women-led businesses that come through our programs and our raising funding, that sometimes the kinds of sectors that women build in are seen as quite niche, or seen as not exciting enough or scalable enough. So we're talking about wellness, femtech, beauty, climate, and what often tends to happen is that if they're not seen as exciting enough, or the investor doesn't have enough interest in that area, then they will be less likely to invest. So
it's so ironic, isn't it? Because we are 51% of the population, so how can beauty or menopause perhaps, or whatever, or health tech for women be niche?
Yeah. Unfortunately,
certainly not niche.
It is not niche at all, and there's been amazing progress in these sectors, but what we tend to see is that where you do have women-led investor firms or women-led investment panels, they are 4.5 times more likely to invest in other women. The data does show that consistently, and so when it comes to the warm introductions, for example, that founders often need to get into these firms, you are 13 times more likely to raise funding if you get a warm introduction from someone into a fund. Men tend to do that more so than women, and there are lots of different stats like that, and so we're finding that we do need more women to sit on these panels who understand these sectors to be able to find these kinds of businesses exciting. And we do need more women to have that pipeline into funds as well from the very beginning. So starting right from the education system, I'd say, in terms of seeing venture capital as a suitable career as well.
And do any of you think, perhaps Dr. Savage, you might like to respond to this one, that there is a merit in mandating a gender balance then on investor panels or committees, or at least those who are supported by the British Business Bank? Do you think that might work?
Absolutely. I think there is. It's important that we have gender balanced decision makers, but I'm also mindful that potentially there is a lack of gender balance in the pipeline, and how do we make that work? And I think it's the an example that I must cite is one that was shared with me from another female entrepreneur who had applied for funding and was told that she wouldn't be granted that particular funding because she was of childbearing age. But that was a panel of men. So their assumption there is that because she is a woman and she's of a certain age, that the longevity just wasn't there for her as a business owner and as a founder. So certainly when you've got women around the room who have gone through a similar journey, they will have a different view. And I think that's the important view to understand, that unless you have people in the room who understand females and women as entrepreneurs, that we will continue to have the same results. So it's absolutely imperative that we have women around the decision table, otherwise we're just not going to move the dial forward.
And just my final question on this section around the diversity of the actual investors. To what extent do intersectional characteristics, ethnicity, age, disability, etc., make it more difficult to get funding? I guess Izzy might be a good person to answer that.
Yes, and just before I do, if I can come in on that last point as well, I think my take is a bit different. I don't think that it should be mandated that women sit on these panels. I think that every fund is complex in what it's investing in, what it does, the thesis it has, the investment areas it has, and it has different needs. And so to mandate something which doesn't take into account those complexities could be clunky and I think invite criticism. I think instead we need to focus on building that pipeline, because if you are forming an investment committee, you're looking from your existing network, and perhaps if there's a mandate, you try and find the women you know who might fit the bill, and then it concentrates the roles in a select number of women already there. So if there is work that's done to improve that pipeline, and having British Business Bank funded funds be the standard bearers for that approach, clearer open calls for IC members that have application processes and clear selection criteria, then we will find more women applying for these roles.
It feels to me, obviously I don't want to put words into anyone's mouth, and I'm not an entrepreneur, but it feels to me like there's no one particular solution, and I imagine that you need a mixture of everything, so more women-led panels, but more pipeline, and lots of other things. Have we got time for Louise to answer?
Just a very quick one. I saw the British Business Bank and the government actually as could be the standard bearers for this, and we could perhaps mandate with those organisations the quota on both the investment committee and the panels that review the startups and people applying for funds.
Absolutely.
I agree with Izzy. I don't think it's right to mandate that across the whole of the industry, because there are such specialisms there. But certainly this British Business Bank could be a standard bearer.
Yeah, and we also talked, funnily enough, we had a meeting, a roundtable in Birmingham last week, and we talked about mandating targets for actual, we could say to British Business Bank, because they have given so much of their funding percentage has gone towards male-led businesses, we could say, right, we now need a target for women-led businesses, and the entrepreneurs in Birmingham, the women entrepreneurs in Birmingham seem to agree with that. I don't know if anyone on the panel here also agrees with that. Yes, all nodding their heads.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I just wanted to come back a little bit. Devie, Louise explained that crowdfunding was successful. I wondered what was successful, because she said it was very difficult to get investment. What did work for you?
It's interestingly social media-based platforms. I think that work better for women. I think face-to-face networking, angel groups that are closed. So the way, I just wanted to quickly raise that point because I think it's very important. The way early stage funding works today is through angel groups that are known to each other. So they're very close-knit groups we have in London and other places, mostly from the school, from the university, or from a club. And it's very, very heavily club-based at this point, and it's very difficult to penetrate into this group of people who have known each other for years. And this is one of the reasons why I think online fundraising and platforms that help with fundraising work. So if we look at the US Angel List, for example, we have Cedars here in the UK. I mean, there are a lot of platforms where everyone is neutral, and there's more scale in terms of having men and women play an equally important role per se, which I think doesn't work well in the online networking, online fundraising world. I mean, if you look at numbers, we have 12% of startups in the UK run by women, but 0.1% of PE investment going into them. 0.5% of VC investment going into them. So it's tapering off as we're getting to the late stages because they're heavily dependent on networking.
Okay, and thank you. I know that we have heard that it is more difficult, and we've heard the statistics around women business owners finding it more difficult to get investment, and when they do, it's less than men. We've heard all those statistics, but there's one that's it's different for different groups of women as well. I think we need to highlight the intersectionality here. Only 10 black women in the entire history of raising funds have raised more than £1 million in the UK ever. I mean, what can we do to tackle the lack of support for intersectional characteristics to be addressed, to be recognised for their talents? And I was going to ask you, Dr. Roni, because you are writing away furiously now.
Yeah, I think that was a shocking number. I didn't realise it was only 10, and that speaks for itself. How do we change it? I think the first step is finding out why only 10 women have achieved that number. And I'm keen to understand that. But I will speak from my lived experience of somebody who has run her own business for 15 years and has recently just bought a business, but also approached a bank for funds for another business, and I've had all the excuses possible. So I feel that it's a lack of understanding of female entrepreneurs, but also when you combine intersectionality, you're quite often sat in front of somebody who just doesn't, what you're saying to them doesn't resonate, and they don't understand who you are as a business owner. And I think naturally, automatically, their sort of knee-jerk reaction is rejection, irrespective of what we say. That is, people make decisions sometimes based on that knee-jerk reaction rather than on the paperwork that's in front of them. And how do you change that? And it goes back to the point that we made about who is around the decision-making table. Certainly we don't. I understand the point about not putting a mandate out there because there isn't a pipeline. So the solution there is, how do we build that pipeline to ensure that people who are around that decision-making table represent people who are applying for funding? Because otherwise, until we get that right, we'll never have the balance that we're looking for, irrespective of what we do.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add on this particular point? If not, I'll move on to angel investment.
Just very quickly, the stats are shocking, and I remember these stats coming out in 2019, and all of us thinking, let's pour as much work as we can into building the programs and the initiatives to change that. The stats have actually gotten worse in the last few years. And what we're finding is that there are the challenges on the founder side in terms of awareness of the options available to them, proximity to wealth in order to invest, and the importance of having networks, both female-led and mixed networks, that give founders the opportunity to meet people who they may not have necessarily had the social capital to know in the first place. So how do we build that? And then on the investor front, there's a pattern recognition that takes place, and you've seen founders from a particular background build and be successful. So naturally, your brain tells you that's what leads to success. And so if you have someone who visibly doesn't fit that match, there's a lot of work your brain is doing to try and kind of convince you otherwise. And so what can we do to actually address biases in investment processes? How can we actually support kind of reversing some of that pattern matching, making Black and Asian-led women businesses to be more visible, and actually kind of buck some of the thinking that there's simply not enough evidence that these type of business owners are successful.
Thank you. Louise, is this a reason why crowdfunding was more successful for you at the beginning, do you think? Or did you ever explore the reasons why it was more successful than other routes of funding at the beginning?
To be honest, when crowdfunding was suggested to me, I had assumed, well, we'd give it a try, but we'd need to go to VC funds as well. And then it was wildly successful. We raised £4 million the first time and 6.2 million the second time. But I think, speaking to what both Dr. Roni and Izzy have said, a lot of those people investing were ordinary members of the public. They were not people with a preconceived idea of what a successful founder looks like. And I also think we were helped a little bit by the business that I run. There is an emotional pull. You know, it's teaching kids to be smart with money. People can understand that very quickly and simply. So I think that is really why. And it was interesting to me that when we then moved on to seeking larger rounds of funding, it was very much more difficult.
Thank you. Natalie.
Thank you. This seems like a good question for Izzy. How easy is it for female entrepreneurs to access angel investment and to get the right support for their business?
So the challenges, I'd say starting with awareness of the options available. So I think about a lot of the founders in our network at Foundervine. We've had around 20,000 founders come through our programs in the last few years, and a lot of them are coming from places where they literally just do not have the awareness of the options available to them. And so a lot of them end up self-funding or bootstrapping for a long time. And, you know, the stats show us that women tend to ask for less and to raise less at a much later stage of their business's journey. So the option of actually leveraging other people's capital is not something that's initially considered in the same way. And so a huge part of addressing that comes from actually investing in the networks that allow women to be in spaces where they can actually understand the opportunity that comes from equity or debt. It's changing perceptions around debt as well. I think it's sometimes seen as a bit of a dirty word or something that you don't do, but it's so important in terms of being able to grow a scalable business. And so changing perceptions around attitude to money is a big one. Putting women into networks where they have the opportunity to meet other people who have raised and understand and demystify that process is so important. And then also, I said before, sort of proximity to wealth. I think if you are able to meet people who could be early investors in your company and provide the kind of small amounts of funding that help validate the concept, build the confidence, and support fundraising, you then have a track record where if you're asking for a larger sum of money later, you know, it's much more straightforward to do. So a lot of it is around the support we can provide and the organisations that exist, and the startup space is so fragmented that if you are coming in, you have no idea where to go initially. So the work we can do to actually create more centralised points of support for founders so they can build that awareness.
Thank you. And how easy is it for women to become angel investors, and what can be done to encourage more women to come forward?
So there are quite a lot of different avenues that I think are really interesting at the moment. So one of the things that I personally think is fantastic that we do as a country is offer SEIS and EIS tax incentives for investors. I don't know if enough women know about the schemes, and I think that if you said to more people who are, you know, relatively successful, potentially early high net worths, that they could have the kind of tax break if they invested in small businesses, a lot of them would say yes, but they don't know. So I think increasing awareness of SEIS and EIS. I think there's also something in investing in angel training programs, and they exist. There's Angel Investing School, there's networks like Alma Angels, and creating these communities of other women investing together are really powerful in terms of being able to pool funds. So they might be smaller pools of funds, but being able to pool funds. I also think there's something in making sure that where founders, like we've said, have brilliant ideas, they're able to actually put it in front of potential angel investors a lot easier. So these platforms that allow founders to pitch in rooms full of like-minded people and get the support that they need are so important. So increasing awareness of the opportunities, the tax incentives, and also building the networks as well.
Thank you.
May I just add a quick point to that? When I was thinking about the answers to this question, right, we're starting to do it for ourselves. You're absolutely right. There is Alma Angels, which is a female-led fund of angels investing in largely female-led companies. I belong to a female network called Wits End, which is Women in Technology, and we started Wits Angels 2 years ago because so many of the membership were interested in investing but didn't know how to go about it. So we found we had 3 or 4 high net worth individuals in the network who were experienced, and they've kind of set up a teaching for other women in the network, and we now invest in, bring forward female-led ventures and invest in them. As you said, they are smaller ticket investments, but it's kind of creating an environment where women who've perhaps never thought about investing before can align with another 10 women who are interested in this venture and learn about it and hear the questions that are asked and do it in a safer space.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So Izzy had already said about how there isn't a huge amount of knowledge about how to incentivise investment and for women to become investors as well. In terms of support for female entrepreneurs, is that the same as well, would you say? Devie?
Yes, I think so. I think definitely there are a lot of schemes that help female entrepreneurs in the UK. We have the CIS scheme, which is very attractive. We also have a fintech special skills visa, which brings a lot of founders and employees into the country. I would say the UK is quite fantastic in terms of the support in the fintech ecosystem. We also have several Bank of England programs that support startups and the regulator as well. So I would say in terms of support for entrepreneurs, the UK is doing the right things. I think what we are lacking perhaps is only in the scale. And I agree with Izzy in that we need to build that pipeline, which comes probably much earlier, to make use of the support that's available. A lot of the grants available, for example, through the government are set at a certain stage of growth, set at a certain stage of revenue, or a certain backing of larger R&D departments of universities, for example. So this is another avenue I've explored, and I think before we reach that level where we can access grants and the tax schemes, I think there's a little bit of a gap.
Okay. Does everyone agree with that on the panel? Or is there something else that you would want to see from, whether it's the Invest in Women Task Force or the British Business Bank? Is there anything that they could be doing differently that would make it easier to be a female entrepreneur?
I could come in there. So what we do at Foundervine is build accelerator programs. They're typically 3-month cohort-based programs. We get cohorts of women-led, diverse-led businesses, and we give them really dedicated support over that period to improve their business models, their operating models, and raise capital. Programs like that we found to be invaluable for founders who are often incredibly lonely and often understaffed in their own head in order to build their businesses. Being able to back accelerators is a big part of that early journey. 2 years ago, we were backed by UK Shared Prosperity Fund funding, so we built 2 programs focused on helping London's tech sector founders to build, and that has been an incredible opportunity for us to support more founders with investment readiness support, including things like mentoring, office hours, and just access to the networks that they need to raise. More programs like that are needed. UK SPF funding is scaling back now. It's not obvious what's replacing it. The Investing in Women's Task Force is investing into funds that will back women-led businesses. Brilliant. But they need to have done all the work to get there to be invested in. The support at that stage before, 18 months earlier, where they have a fantastic idea and they're just trudging along. Greater funding in that space is so important because a lot of ideas go into the graveyard, and the ones that manage to push through then get access to the support that they need to grow.
Does everybody else feel that there is a gap before getting to the point of investing in Women Task Force, and that there needs to be more support?
Absolutely. And also, when you're at that incredibly early stage, if you've not come from the sort of an investment banking, VC banking background, I don't know how anyone's expected to know what is out there or to act. I mean, I'm going back a few years now, but I spent so much time on Google, just Googling, how do I fund my business? Where do I go? And I'd never heard of the term angel investor. I was asking friends who they knew who were rich. Now, you know, it sounds like a joke, but it was a bit of a joke, but that's where it started. And so somehow, you know, if Foundervine is a great organisation doing brilliant things, there are other accelerators out there that now I'm aware of, and now if somebody comes to me with an idea, I can point them in the right direction, but yes, it's only because my head has somehow risen above a parapet that I'm visible and people come and ask me.
Thank you. Dr. Roni and then Catherine.
I'm sat in the room as a female founder who has run her business for 15 years. I'm finding out about various different initiatives while I'm in the room. And in fact, I found out about the Investing Women Hub when I read the notes from Jack. So, and I've been an entrepreneur for the last 15 years. So I think the issue here is there is a vast amount of support out there. There's a vast amount of information out there, but people just don't know where to go for it. And what we need to elevate female founders and to elevate business overall, actually, is to have a hub that we can go to for information. And when we look at female founders specifically, is that a role for Investing Women Task Force? I don't think so. There's a role there for somebody to sort of signpost for female founders at different stages of their journey, and we don't have that at the moment. So whether it's support for starting up, support for scaling up. I mean, as a business owner, I've got probably 6 different advisors who advise me on running my business, and they're not technical, they're not earning me money, they're just there to make sure that I have the right level of information, because I can't rely on Google. So where is it that we can go to get the information that we need, not just at startup, but at different stages of our journey? And I don't know whose role that is, but certainly having lots of different organisations doing it on their own isn't the solution in the long term.
No, I shall caveat that everything that is on the internet isn't always true. Catherine.
Just 2 small follow-ups. So, Roni, sorry if I missed it at the beginning, but how did you get the funding for your business then 15 years ago?
See, I feel like an imposter in here, because I've bootstrapped to this stage, and I've actually even bootstrapped my acquisition. But obviously, as I'm looking at scaling the business, I know that it's very important to Izzy's point earlier in terms of scaling, that debt is actually a good thing for really sort of growing the business. So to date, I have bootstrapped. So very much imposter.
And then my other question was, how do you get into accelerator funds? Do you have to apply? Because we heard with our roundtable that one of the things that people had to apply for took 80 hours for them to kind of fill in the application form, and then they got no feedback. That was Innovate UK, so a different, not...
answer, because I've spent a lot of my time applying for accelerator programs. There are about, I think, 200 accelerator programs in the UK for fintech startups. So there are quite a few that we do apply to. And each one, like you said, takes hours. And it includes everything from a pitch to starting with one-liners all the way to a detailed revenue plan and a business strategy plan, which is normally fine and something you're expected to have, but they ask for variations that you may have to create from scratch with every accelerator program, which then takes effort and time. So generally, if you're applying to about 10 to 20 accelerator programs, it does become a full-time job. And then you have the process of being ready to be part of that as well.
Thank you.
Go
Izzy, yeah.
Public record, Foundervine's applications are not as long. I promise. I promise. They're not as long, but they are extremely competitive. So we've had 20,000 applications over the last 7 years for our programs. 9% are successful, and so that's 19-odd thousand who are just struggling to find the support that they need to grow. And so while there are hundreds of different avenues, they are incredibly competitive, often very time and kind of cohort based. And so after that support has ended, it's quite difficult to continue to support these businesses, even though they need support for a long time. So I think the model is something that I think about a lot, of how we can support businesses for a long term in a sustainable way, and it's something that I think government can very much invest in as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Natalie.
So to Devie, why do female-led businesses in fintech secure less funding at lower valuations despite comparable business performance to male-led companies?
I think we have explored quite a few reasons. I would say the fundamental reason being lack of access to the early stage networks is definitely the number one reason. I started with bootstrapping as well, and I think a lot of us do go to ourselves first and to close family first before asking the outside world. It is a kind of imposter syndrome or lack of belief that you are able to ask others for your first funding. I think in general, women do tend to feel that you are not equipped to ask for money from outsiders until you have put all your money in yourselves. And then once you start getting into the angel networks and accelerator programs, then again you have this holding you back in terms of the belief that of course you are different from the others, and I had the extra challenge of not being I was not born or I didn't grow up in the UK. So I was an adult coming into a new country and asking for funds, which made it even harder. I think all of those are challenges in terms of accessing early stage investment. And once you don't have that early stage momentum, your valuation does not go up unless something significantly changes. So that actually, the first 2 years determines how much funding you're able to get in the next 10 years. And that is where women, I think, genuinely struggle a lot. They do not go to that stage of scale where they are able to ask for the big money for the early stage issues we have discussed. And also a lot of the aspects, I would admit that it's us holding us back in terms of the inability to ask confidently as well.
Okay. So, sorry, I just wanted to ask, what could be done to address this, do you think?
I think definitely more support. And I think all four of us agree that we have not heard of the Invest in Women task force until today. I think just having access to a brand that is there to support you, and we are aware of that, and we are able to ask for help will make a huge difference. And then it's just adding things to that brand in terms of saying, oh, we will provide you with a list of angel networks. We will provide you with other options. If you want to do crowdfunding, we have these platforms. But I think we need a central point where we know that we can go and ask for help.
Louise, do you want to say anything?
It was a quick point on the funding, women receiving less funding. I have a concern that it's becoming a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, that there has been so much media attention to the fact that women only get 2% and diverse female founders get a fraction of that it's actually making women cautious about how much money they ask for, and that really then, as you say, stymies growth in their very early stage, which then stymies growth and scalability. So I think that's something, I don't know how we change that other than changing the narrative around it by correcting the balance.
Can I just come back on that point? I mean, I'll just go back to my point I made earlier in terms of why these percentages are so low and why they've been low for so long. And I think generally the response to that is because the there isn't diversity in the decision-making panel and men are loaning money out to men. But actually, I don't think that's the only issue. And I think it's important that we take a step back and identify what are the real causes of the disparity in those numbers. And there are a number of issues that I could cite as a business owner. And actually, you know, to Devie's point earlier about, I've run my business for 15 years, but actually I haven't not taken on investment because I was scared. I haven't taken business on because I had young children, actually. Mm-hmm. So my focus in the early years of running my business was waiting for my kids to grow up. And now that my kids are older, I've got time to spend to scale my business and take on investment. So I bought a business 3 weeks ago. So there are different reasons that are holding women back. And I think it's really important that we understand what those reasons are, and that we're speaking to, when we talk about the diversity of women, that we're speaking to women at different, it's not just about what we look like, but actually different challenges. You know, I certainly wouldn't have been taking on 10 million when my kids were 3 and 6 months old, but certainly I can now. So it's just understanding the different women that come to the table and what the real issues are, so we can fix those issues. And I know we're going to be talking solutions later, so I don't want to jump into those solutions, but I think if we identify the real problems, then we can fix them rather than focus on what isn't the issue.
Thank you. And then, Roni, I wanted to ask you, what specific challenges have you faced in starting and sustaining a business in a male-dominated sector?
How long do we have? I mean, I work in a sector where sort of 15% of the entire workforce is female, 2% are in leadership roles, and nobody else looks like me doing what I do in this country, nobody. So what challenges have I faced? The fact that people don't expect somebody who looks like you to walk into the room or to be the decision maker, that's a huge challenge. Imposter syndrome is a challenge, irrespective of whether people acknowledge that or not. It is an issue. But I think ultimately it's the perception that people have of you as a female founder that has an impact. I spent the first, probably until 2017, hiding behind a name that sounds very much like a bloke, for instance, and I'd send a man out instead of me for those really important meetings, because I thought, my assumption at that point was that it'd be a lot easier for them to be in the room, because people who are making the decisions don't look anything like me. So that is a challenge. That is a challenge. We need to ensure that people who are making decisions look like people who make up our country. And as you said before, if women make up 51% of the population, then we should have women making up at least you know, a significant proportion of the decision-making rooms. So that was a huge challenge for me. Was decision makers look nothing like me, and naturally are drawn to people who look like them.
Thank you. And this one's open to any of you that wanted to answer. To what extent are viable businesses overlooked because they're in sectors which male investors might not understand or value, such as beauty or femtech?
Completely. We probably all want to say this. Yeah, I mean, completely. I'll give my personal experience. I was all patted on the head and told I needed to start a charity, or an educational platform, not a commercial business. Bizarre, because men are parents too, but that happens all the time. And we've named some of the sectors. You know, it can be femtech, it can be beauty, it can be childcare. I know another couple of women working in the childcare space, and same story. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to add to that, just from a societal perspective, we know that women are more likely to build socially responsible companies with socially responsible policies in them. They're likely to recruit more women and more people from underrepresented backgrounds, and so there's a huge societal advantage from having women start these businesses and backing them. And what we're finding over and over again is that, just kind of zooming out a bit, is that if we're not having these women start businesses, and for me, failure is just as good as success, because even if you figured out this isn't right for you and you're going back into the workforce, you're going back into the workforce to be more entrepreneurial in that workplace, to change it and make it more productive. And so overall, just having more women starting businesses benefits the entire workforce, regardless of whether their business is successful. So we need to fund women's ability to fail just as much as we fund them to be successful, and to allow it to just fail safely. It's okay, lots of businesses fail. Fail safely, have a go at it, and use that skill set, use that knowledge, use that confidence to go into the world and make it better as well.
Thank you.
Natalie. Izzy, what you just said there about failing and failing safely, that's quite an un-British view, even in business, whereas in America, to fail as a business person, whether you're a male or a female, actually is quite a badge of honour, because as you say, it's failing and you're still learning, you're still trying, you're still going out there, or you've learnt a lesson and you've taken it somewhere else. Like, is there something fundamentally that we need to change and address with our business culture when it comes to this and to the attitudes of this? I can see that my daughter's school is phoning me. Sorry. Is there anything that we need to change on that, and particularly around money? So there is still this weird. Is it something to do with our country and our views about this and how we talk about money and who gets to talk about money? I still feel very sheepish. We all have to fundraise to print our leaflets. The bit that I hate the most is asking for money. Why? My ideas are worth backing, your ideas are worth backing, everyone's ideas are worth backing here as much as anybody else's. What is it that we need to break this kind of culture around us being shy around being money? Why? How do we lessen the imposter syndrome that fantastic women have and shouldn't have? It doesn't belong with them. How do we break that culture? Louise?
I have to put my hand up for that one, don't I? For me, it's all about financial literacy. So it's about teaching kids about money. I don't know if everybody here knows, we've been lobbying the government for probably 3 years now to try and make financial education mandatory in every school in the UK. And the purpose of that is multifold. I mean, it's to create a generation or a generational shift of kids who emerge as young adults empowered, confident and smart with money. But as part of what we try and do, it's triggering conversations in the home, open conversations in the home about money, and getting people to discuss it more openly. That, what a lot of our research shows that people who are confident with money, people who've received a financial education as young people, are 46% more likely to start a business. There's part of the answer to the problem we're talking about today. That creates more jobs in the economy, that creates more wealth in society. And I think getting those conversations going from very early on in a child's life and in that household is hugely important.
How early on, Louise, do you reckon?
Well, we will say as a mother, I would say right from the get-go, as soon as a child is understanding the buy-sell concept, which is very early, is 4 or 5. In terms of what the government can do, we're looking for it to be made mandatory in primary schools.
Well, they're already very good at negotiations, so I think the money side of it should follow through.
Yeah.
Devie.
Yeah, I just want to say it's not just a UK problem.
Okay.
We did a very interesting study in mainland Europe, in Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and we saw the same issue, that people are not willing to discuss money. And one of the projects our client did was very interesting. They opened up the numbers for everyone to see how much the peers were saving and how much the peers were investing. And that completely changed the nature of savings and investing. I think if we can have open, visible platforms or communities where we are able to share, oh, by the way, I'm investing in startups, And this is how much I've put into startups versus real estate. I mean, UK's favorite investment is property. So this is how much I'm saving towards the house versus putting into high growth investments or social investments. I think just having access to those numbers will absolutely change the way we think. And this project, I've seen it happen, and it completely changed the numbers of savings going up from £100 a month to close to £1,000 a month. So it was a significant impact of just seeing what your peers were doing.
Okay, thank you. Rachel.
Thank you. I think we've covered some of the ground that I was going to touch on. But I think I slightly want to take you back to this issue around failure, because it was something that we looked at when we spoke to female entrepreneurs in Birmingham, was that on the statistics there are far more businesses that are male run that fail than there are female, which then I think leads me on to my question, which is, do you think that a lot of the support for female-led businesses is too focused on the start-up stages and not enough about growth and sustainability, so that next level up? And I know, Louise, you've touched on some of this already, but do you want to go first?
Absolutely the case, yes. I think we've said there's a gap in how female-led businesses find those very early stage support networks, but they are there. Where it starts to dissipate is at growth stage, at when you're scaling at a high speed and wanting to expand at a high speed. Those networks pretty much disappear, and if you haven't had access to venture capital funds who can either follow with more funding or introduce you to their network, then there is a big gap. Yeah.
Roni, you talked about a lot of your sort of initial growth was bootstrapping and the debt route, which I think is the traditional route, particularly for those of us who are involved in property. But did you find scaling up was the more difficult?
Well, I'm at scale-up stage, so it's actually quite interesting. There is a significant amount of support out there, but it's just knowing where to find it, and that it just goes back to I made this point earlier. It's I'm having lots of conversations. I'm speaking to BGF, for instance, at the moment, and I know they're really sort of intentional about supporting female founders, but I'm not sure how many other female founders are aware of BGF. I mean, I know what BBB is doing for female founders, but again, there's a lot that. I mean, I've spoken to the bank about this, but the stats that are being released are around startups. And we know that 40% of startup funding goes to female founders, but actually how much of that goes to scale up, we're not quite sure. So there is so much focus on let's get them off the ground, but actually the sort of women who have got past that stage, how do we get them above? There is some support, but it's not, it's not visible enough, I'd say.
I know this touches very much on Louise's sort of area and realm, but I'd like to ask the other members, what financial education, Izzy, did you have prior to starting your business, and do you think that this adequately equipped you to get off the ground?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think background when it comes to being able to successfully lead a business. I spent some time before starting a business in the University of London helping students start up. And what I found is that younger people who are able to work in industry for a period of time before they start are able to build foundational knowledge in a number of areas, whether that's finance, human resources, leadership strategy, all those things. That can be very beneficial, and that's not to say starting from school isn't something you should do, but I think that having work experience is so important. So not necessarily financial knowledge, because quite frankly you can use accountancy systems and pay people to do that kind of stuff for you, but being able to actually have a holistic view of what it takes to be a leader, to be a strategist, to manage people, to delegate, and to build the operational infrastructure of a business is so important. And we are not taught that. So to extend Louise's point, I'd say absolutely financial education in schools, but enterprise skills in schools are important. How are we teaching young people to be project managers, to collaborate in teams, to manage money effectively, to, you know, create products from a very early age is so important, so that when they get to a place and they're thinking, gosh, how do I do this? As girls in particular, to have the confidence to know that they could be the person at the top managing other people doing the things. Because that's the key thing. Am I a leader? Am I someone who can lead people and build something that is complex? That's more important, I'd say, than having financial knowledge, particularly in the age we're in with technology and how it can support people in building.
Thank you. Devie?
Yeah, I mean, we had almost no financial education growing up, and I think absolutely essential in schools. I think it's still lacking, looking at my son in schools today. And I think it's absolutely essential to learn how to manage your own personal expenses before you try to manage bigger money. And I think that the lessons you learn are relevant, whether you're running a startup or running your own budget for the week. And I think it does start at a young age. And if you try to offer this education and the skills that Izzy mentioned post-university, I find that it's less helpful compared to when it's given at primary or secondary levels. So I think definitely the message should be as early as possible, which we haven't had in my generation, I believe.
Thank you. Louise, we spent yesterday afternoon at a round table discussing financial education in schools, and we had an interesting group of young people who were very supportive of that. What specific sort of skills and information do you think people need, and how easily available is it? And does it differ between what women need and what men setting up a business need?
I don't think there's any difference in terms of the skills needed between women and men setting up a business, no. And so in terms of specifically skills relating to financial education at school, it's understanding the absolute basics, I guess, of how to set a budget, how to live to a budget, how to distinguish between wants and needs. And that sounds incredibly simplistic, but today's society is so focused on instant gratification. You know, if we think about how we expect everything on our phone instantly, and if it's taking 5 seconds to load, we're banging on a button. That need to instill a sense of perhaps you need to save up for something before you buy it. You need to set a budget when your student loan comes in. If you want to rent a property, buy a house, you need to think about what revenue you've got coming in, how you're going to manage that, where you can cut your costs, what you might choose to spend your money on, and how you save in order to run your own life, as Devie said. It really doesn't matter whether it's looking after your own budget. When you then extrapolate that to running a business, Izzy's quite right, there's software to help you, but if you haven't got the basic skills of being able to balance those books, to use an accounting term, then you're already in a disadvantaged situation.
Does anybody think there's a risk sometimes of that kind of education holding people back and holding particularly women back, as opposed to men who are more likely to take risks? I think we as women are often less likely to take risks, and particularly if we've had that sort of education, that sort of money doesn't grow on trees, you know, save up the pennies and it'll sort of help the pounds, that kind of...
I think I disagree. Maybe I'll support Louise a bit in this.
Just trying to be a bit of a devil's advocate there.
Yeah, what I think is financial education should not be about savings or managing your money only. I think investing and taking risks should be a big part of that lesson. And I think we should probably teach everyone, including girls, how to take better risks and more risks. And why not? I mean, and if we can prove to them that investing in, let's say, startups, very selfishly, will bring in a huge amount of returns, and this is the kind of returns you're seeing, which is going to be significantly higher than the savings you're going to do, and the need for diversifying your portfolio while doing that, I think that's the message we need to send out. It should not be about savings only, is what I believe.
I think that's what I was getting at. Thank you, Devie. Yeah.
Add to that. So while I do agree that the fundamental education should be the same for boys and girls, having run hundreds of events and programs that focus on supporting women, having coached hundreds of founders building businesses, I tell you, a young man will come to me and he'll say, hey, I've got this product, how do I build it? Help me. A woman will come to me and I'll spend 4 sessions just helping her build her confidence that she's the right person to start building that product before we get there. So when we're talking about the education we provide, it's less about providing different education, but it's about having nuanced and relevant education. It has to include more confidence and resilience skills building and treating that like a hard skill, like finance. Confidence is so important. And, you know, just going back to your point, Sarah, about the differences in the US and UK culture and our feelings, you know, as British people, young girls are taught to be good, you have to be kind of modest, and you have to be quiet, and you have to, you know, you have to present nicely, be good. You know, we need to have more girls growing up being told, you need to shake things up, you need to speak up if you don't agree with something, you need to talk back if someone's treating you badly. And if we're teaching that at school, it builds into a risk appetite, it builds into a speaking confidence, it builds into the understanding that if this person has raised 100-odd million, I can do that too, and I just need to figure it out for myself. And that's so important, and I don't see it enough in the schools that I go to. I don't see it enough in our university system either, having worked there for several years as well.
Can I just make a very quick point? Sorry, I just bring my engineering mindset to this conversation. I don't disagree with what you said entirely. Just to caveat that, but actually, if you take a few steps back and we look at why that, you know, the boy has a different attitude to the girl, and it's why is that happening? And that's because of how the boy and the girl have been conditioned very differently from the grassroots. And for us to make that change happen, so rather than treating boys, because my concern with this is that we need to get to the point where we don't treat boys and girls differently, where we don't need to pull girls into a room and tell them that they need to be more confident, because actually they're all being treated the same from the get-go. So the boys and girls are being exposed to the same. So boys can do netball as much as girls can play football, and it's as simple as that in terms of how do we get that right at the grassroots stage, at the education stage, in primary school, as early as nursery, you know, where boys have been putting in a different sort of set to girls are. How do we fix that from really early doors so that we're creating a generation of boys and girls who actually, where girls are actually thinking I can do just as well as that boy can, and vice versa. And we speak about confidence, about girls not having confidence, and I've done a lot of research around confidence, and I worry that it's a terminology that's been bandied around as women not having it. Actually, I'm not sure that's correct. I think what it is that because we have been conditioned from when we were children, you know, we're still being conditioned as a parent. I found that sort of, you know, maybe my job took a back seat while I was raising my kids. Of my husband. So we're still being conditioned as we grow older. How do we fix that? It's not confidence, but it's courage, in my opinion. And how do we instill courage in women and in girls when we talk about imposter syndrome and all the other things that we talk about? I'd like to get to the point where we don't say that women lack confidence, but we actually say that women aren't as courageous as maybe their counterpart men. And maybe we may actually start to move the dial if we look at courage rather than confidence. Slightly sort of contentious, but that's the end.
I think that's really interesting, and just if I may, because it's a subject that I'm very sort of keen on, is this financial education, and I think one of the things we talked about yesterday is that how do we make that financial education exciting to young people and get them to take it on board, as opposed to listening to potentially social media influencers who aren't always, sometimes, but not always on the right page, and how do we help people to navigate that difficult environment there, Louise?
Well, I think one of the things that came out of some of the young people who were there yesterday was the power of a special day in school, wasn't it? We talked about financial education and where should that sit in a school curriculum. Was it in PSHE or was it in maths, or where did it sit? And what came out strongly from the young people was when the school kind of created a special day, which they felt should be on a regular occurrence. They said not once a year, but sort of every couple of months or every month, where the focus was on direct application of financial literacy. So not the theory, but building a business or thinking about what you had to do if you developed a product or whatever the case might be, but that would be exciting. They also talked about bringing in specialist groups to run that day so that it wasn't putting a burden on, an additional burden on teachers. But that was a really interesting outcome from yesterday, actually.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. Catherine.
Thank you. And the conversation around confidence and courage brings me on perfectly to the next bit. But I see both Izzy and Roni, both your points of view here, but I think at the end of the day, just to reflect back on what you said, we are where we are, so I kind of agree with Izzy. At this point, we need to build courage or confidence into our women when they come to you. And that, for me, is really important because we haven't got to the point yet where children are treated the same in primary school. And I could give you lots of examples of that. But in terms of something that's helped me a lot over the years is a mentor. I've had different mentors at different stages, and getting into politics, I could not have done it without a massive network of women helping me and supporting me and giving me the courage. So out of you, who has a mentor right now? Anyone? Hundreds. You don't have to tell me who. So you have hundreds.
Quite a few in the
yeah.
industry, yeah.
So everybody.
Advisory board. So.
I was going to say there's not somebody who is my coach or my mentor, but I have a network that I tap into for advice and support. Yeah.
So So you're obviously a bit further on your journey than a lot of the women that you might be helping, because you're amazing women, and I'm sure you're all reaching down to help other women come up the ladder. So is there enough networking and mentorship out there for women? Anybody? Go for it. Whoever wants to start. Devie, do you want to start?
We have a lot. Is that enough? Probably not, because we're trying to scale the number of women entrepreneurs in the first place. I think we need to have lots more examples of women founders who have done well, who have raised funding, have been through the challenges we've talked about. I think the more examples we have, the better the mentorship will be. So I also agree with the others that we need that network or group of mentors rather than one person. We do have mentors associated with all the accelerator programs, all of the angel investment clubs that we have. So there are mentorships available, but we have the exact same challenge that we have with raising funding in the early stages, in that maybe it's not helping us scale enough.
And something, just to move it on a bit as well, something that was said in a previous round table was that there was different views. Should those networks, so if you're going to a networking event, is it better to be a male and female networking event or a woman-only networking event? And I think that's quite interesting. I'd really love your opinions on that.
I think you need both. So what I find interesting is if you're in a female-only network, and so I mentioned earlier I belong to one called Wits End, having a humorous name to it, which is senior level women in tech. The power in the room is insane.
Yeah.
And I don't mean power in terms of the traditional sense of the word power, but the energy level, the openness, the honesty, the sharing, the lack of ego in the room is incredible. And I always walk away from any event I go to with that particular network or other female networks hugely excited and energised and empowered. But I don't think you should limit yourself to that, because that's not the world we live in. And if we're not also engaged in networks that are both genders, all genders, then that's really important. We're really missing a trick. And we also, of course, we need to bring along men with us, because they're the other half of the population.
I totally agree with you, Louise, on that. I also join lots of female sort of networking groups, and you come away and you just buzz for weeks afterwards. However, if I look at my industry, for instance, where a significant proportion of decision makers are men, if I spend time in the room with a sort of small 15%, I'm never going to make change happen. So it's important that you have the decision makers in the room. And actually I think there's a really sort of important place for diverse spaces where men are involved. We're constantly trying to get male allies in the room where we're having those sort of important conversations. So I think there's a place for both. I totally agree with Louise.
Okay, great. Unless you have got anything different
just
to add on
to
that.
say, just from a policy or an approach, investing more in these networks. They are often very individually led, under-resourced. Sometimes you're in a pub and everyone covers their own tab, And so what does it look like for us to back, and just going back to female founders building businesses, the kinds of mentorship networks where they are expert-led and driven, they are structured, you can find them online and register rather than knowing a Roni or a Louise, and really be able to access without having that existing network, because they exist but they are very gated. I would have to dig through a lot to find Wits End, and likewise with the networks we belong to, we're not accessible people. What does it look like to have networks where you can literally just Google Foundervine? We run lots of mentoring programs, but there are others available, and you can just sign up regardless of who you know, and I think that's a really key thing that we can find more funding towards.
Thank you. We touched on this.
Sorry, Catherine, can I just ask a quick question about mentoring? So I have, looking at diversity inclusion schemes, and quite often big business, when they want to see a pipeline of female talent come up through their ranks, they quite often say, we'll do mentoring for the women. And actually they're not the problem. The problem is the middle management that aren't seeing the leadership skills within the women already. Is there any merit in perhaps women mentoring men within this? So any female investors actually mentoring male investors potentially? Because I don't think, apart from the courage issue and the confidence, I think it's the skills not being seen. We already know the statistics that women-owned businesses are going to be better in terms of returns for investments, that they will grow, that they will be more successful. So why is it that we're not seeing that investment? And perhaps the problem is necessarily not the women and the mentorship needed, but perhaps the mentorship of the men that hold the money. Do you know any male investors that have changed their views or have been influenced in any way by what they have seen from female entrepreneurs?
I'm not going to name names.
You don't have to.
No, I'm working with one angel investor group at the moment, having been introduced to them a year and a half ago. I pointed out they don't have a single woman on their board, they don't have a single female in their leadership team, and having looked at the last year and a bit of deals that have come into my inbox, there have only been 3 female-led companies, and so I have robustly challenged them about why their pipeline looks like that when I'm receiving from other sources so many other opportunities for investment. which I wish I had enough money to put into. But, no, I don't know of any that are actively doing it, but I go back to, I suppose, those of us who can need to be part of making that change.
And just from a perspective of institutional capital, so I sit on the investment committee for a fund called the Growth Impact Fund, and just this morning I had an IC meeting, and it's a fund which was intentional from the beginning about being founder first and focused on supporting diversity and entrepreneurship. And so because of that, they accidentally ended up with an all-female investment committee. There is a man now, but in the beginning it was just an accident because of the network, and they reached out to people who were in their network. And what ends up happening is that, as well as funding, you become allocated to the business as a deal mentor initially, and then as a mentor afterwards. And so what ends up happening is that you've got a founder-focused fund that has 49% of application from women compared to, I think it's 13% industry average. And they have dedicated support, and they negotiate flexible finance with that founder. So a great example, we've raised 3 rounds of social investment, and we wanted a repayment holiday for, I think it was 9 to 12 months when we first raised. The fund we raised from gave us that. We just didn't want to pay interest for a period. We wanted to restructure our arrangement because we had a working capital need. They were very open, and it's a female-led team, and that has just been so important to me. And so in that sense, I think we're talking about mentoring in a general context in kind of social networks, but when it comes to the funds that are there, institutional funders need to build mentoring networks into their model and allow the experts in their network, the talent in their network, to be allocated to their portfolio in order to give these founders the opportunity to get that kind of advice as well.
Excellent. Catherine?
We've talked about this a little bit already, particularly with you, Roni, about caring and family responsibilities, and what extent, if any, you have caring and family responsibilities impacted the running of your business or businesses of those that you know. And it doesn't have, obviously, not just childcare, but other caring for older people, whatever, in your family.
So I'll probably go. So my son had a pretty serious medical condition while I was running my business. In the early stages of starting up, in fact, and which meant I had to take a substantial amount of time off to be in hospital with him. And I think research has proven that women carry more emotional load and mental load. I think we don't have to argue on that. But in terms of caring, if you have a regular job in a corporate, you're able to take time off, get paid for it, for caring responsibilities, and you have a buffer in terms of knowing that you can go back to doing that job. What happens to entrepreneurs, and this is what happened to me, is that you don't get paid, you don't have new projects. During the time, you are taking that break for caring. So there is no system or buffer to support you while you're going through an emergency situation or a caring situation, which adds that extra risk of becoming a founder in the first place, and which always carries that extra mental load for women who have children. I think, and it's always stays with me even now, although I've gone back to now working full time. It is a worry that if I need to take time off now, I'm not sure if the company will survive. So I think it is a genuine problem for the vast majority of us. Without an emergency issue, it goes fine. But what do you do when you do have an emergency situation and you need time off?
Thank you. Anyone else?
It's a real challenge, and when you talk about funding for women who are of childbearing age, as an employer, you've got to consider what the potential constraints are of a woman who is of childbearing age, and I say that quite openly. So I started my business with children who were 6 and 3, and then 3 years into running the business, I had another child. So to Devie's point, I didn't take any time off. I couldn't take any time off. There was just no just nothing there. There was no support. There was nothing there for me. But actually, what enables you as an entrepreneur to carry on is potentially friends and family support. So in my case, a mother support who was there. But without that support, it would have been totally impossible for my business to carry on. So actually, you go from being an entrepreneur to having no business at all if you are going to be having a child and you don't have employees. So it's a real issue. It's a real issue, and I'm not quite sure what the solution is for women who are starting up. But obviously, when you get to scale up stage and you've got a team around you, it's much easier to step away from it. But if you are the sort of sole runner of your business, what do you do when you're having children? There is no. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the solution yet, unless you've got family support.
And just from an investor perspective, so I've been an angel investor for a while, but also scoping out what it would take to be an institutional investor. And one thing I found really interesting was, and it's changed now, but in LP agreements that GPs have to sign when they raise their funds, there's something called the kind of key person event, and it's a period of time, I think about 3 weeks. If you're out of the business, it triggers a clause where the investor can basically screw you over in different ways. Can I say screw over? I've said it twice. And so if you had a baby, basically that would, any time off would trigger a key person event. And so what was that built in to the thinking when it was built, and how do we ensure that when someone decides I want to set up a fund to invest in anyone, there aren't clauses that limit their ability to actually raise a family whilst they're building a fund. There's also other things like the GP commit. So you put in like thousands of pounds of your own money in order to signal your commitment when you're building a fund. If you've been out of the workplace for a period of time where you simply don't have the same amount of savings, you're just simply not in a position to put that commit forward in order to raise your first fund. And so I kind of went in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed thinking, I'm going to raise all this money. And then immediately it was like, whoa, okay, there's all these things that I need to think about, that some of them are just general things everyone has to put up with, but there's some things I think as a woman you need to really take into consideration, because if your business fails, you fail, but you can kind of pick yourself up. If you fail raising a fund and you have lots of LPs who have committed tens of millions of pounds, that's a completely different picture. So how do we de-risk that for emerging fund managers?
And does anyone have any ideas on what support you would like to see then for female founders with family or caring responsibilities?
And I know this has come up in sort of recent conversations around all sorts of caring for family, but I wonder whether there should be some consideration for ring fencing some support for female entrepreneurs, and whether that fund goes to them directly, or generally I find there's a lot of family support who potentially then have to step away from work with no compensation whatsoever. So some consideration needs to be taken in terms of how do we financially compensate and incentivize female entrepreneurs to carry on while still procreating and building the population of our country, which is extremely important, right? So how do we do both? Because what we don't want is that women step away from entrepreneurship just for the purposes of building a family. And if you are employed, you can go off on maternity leave, and there is some support in that regard. If you're an entrepreneur, there isn't that, and there should be. There really should be.
I want to push back a bit and just say exactly what it is that you want. I mean, don't think of the constraints of what we have politically at the moment. Tell me what it is that would make it better if you've got child responsibilities, particularly, or caregiving responsibilities. Dr. Roni, you had said earlier about not starting the business when your children were 3 and 6 months. There's never a good time or a perfect time to have a baby. I imagine there's no good or perfect time to start a business.
No.
So what would have made it easier or possible for you to have done it when you wanted to?
I think having some sort of financial backing would certainly help. And I think the point I'm making here is, I've given an example of my mother who'd had to step in and help, but there was no compensation for her doing that. So what I'm saying is that if there is an avenue for some sort of support for carers so that I can carry on running my business, because I did carry on running my business. It was just her that lost out. So how can we weave that in so that, you know, it's not just about sort of support for nurseries and funding through nurseries, but actually funding for family who have to care for those female entrepreneurs who have children.
Does anyone know?
Financial support for entrepreneurs should mirror what financial support is available for employees in a large corporate. So in terms of, for example, child tax credit, being able to send them to nursery earlier perhaps, paying paid carers if needed. So I think it's not a huge amount of difference to what we have in the corporate world already. But if there's a product that can support women going through entrepreneurship in the same way, with the exact same features, I think that would be great.
Does anybody else have anything to add to those? No?
I think I'm going to second what Devie has said there. It makes a massive difference. My daughter is currently off on maternity leave, and she's worked for our company since she was 18, so nine years now. So she has the luxury of enhanced maternity leave. I was able to take 3.5 weeks off work when I had her, and you know I've guilt-tripped myself every which way because of that. And I had my son 3 years later and had probably a little bit more time off work, but not much. And that was tough. And that was because I had to keep the business going or give up.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you so much for your expertise today, and your input and your insight. And Louise, you talked about having that nice feeling when you leave a female entrepreneur event. I kind of feel quite energised, and it is lovely to be able to be surrounded by amazing women, and I hope that you go away never ever feeling that imposter syndrome, because I've been in utter awe of all four of you today, so I'm really grateful for your input. We haven't heard from investors yet. You don't have to say publicly. We would love to hear from ones that are doing this well and advocate for women and female entrepreneurs. We'd also love to hear from people that don't do this well, because I want to know why they don't. I want to know why they're not willing to change, or why they're not willing to see the brilliance that they're missing out on. So if after this you could email some investors that you think we should hear from, that would be great. Thank you so much. That brings this session to a close. Order. Thank you.